Welcome to week 46 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
I'm Misha.
I'm Diane.
We watched episode 223, which originally aired on Monday, June 10th, 1985. John Perkins, little baby John, has two white-clad attendants in his bassinet. The torturer's in the room too, and he's on the phone with Parker Simonson. He asks if they should keep Jack alive, and Parker says to wait at least until the coronation. So now we know a little something about what's going on. They're waiting for a coronation. Then after the phone call, Parker asks faux Jack, "How is your cousin?" So we found out something we didn't know we wanted to know about faux Jack. He is real Jack's cousin.
And we know that real Jack is still alive.
Mm-hmm. So we still don't know his name or whether or not he's a lawyer, but we know he's Jack's cousin. And he doesn't seem to be that worried if his cousin gets killed.
No.
So he's kind of a bad guy. Jack says New Staland will fall into our hands. So it seems like somehow they're going to use this coronation to gain control over the country of New Staland.
Yeah, so I guess we're assuming just from the kind of costumes we've seen in that maybe it's sort of a country a little bit like that country that was in Dynasty. What was it called? Moldavia or something?
Yeah. It's got a very Moldavian vibe.
Yeah.
A very fancily dressed old man picks up the baby. I don't know if that's the same guy that gave him the ring a few episodes back. But he says, "You have the look of a king, my boy. And soon you will be one."
Mm.
And then the torturer, who's kind of skulking around in the background, says, "Sooner than you think." So, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that for the baby to become a king, someone would have to get bumped off or something first. So this could be a much deeper plot than even baby swapping. There could be some sort of a political assassination or something involved as well.
Mm-hmm. But somehow the boy's next in line, so presumably he's either been adopted by the king or passed off by the queen as the king's own son.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe biologically is the king's own son, because we don't know how Amy got pregnant.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it seems to me the queen might know more about it than the king, if the king's the one who ends up getting bumped off. This may be some complex plan of the queen's to gain control of the country or something. Kelly is looking through old pictures of Joe, which is nice, but Eden doesn't think so.
Mm-hmm.
She thinks Kelly should be getting out. The phone rings and it's Nick, and Kelly's on the verge of turning down a dinner invitation, but Eden accepts it for her. Kelly mentions that she skipped Ted's graduation earlier in the day because she wanted to avoid the crowds, so she's being forced to go out to, as it turns out, the State Street Bistro.
Mm-hmm.
At the Lockridges, everyone's dressed up, having just returned from the graduation ceremony. And Augusta says, "I can't believe you're going to college."
Mm-hmm.
So we had just been talking, I think yesterday, about must be graduation coming up soon, but unfortunately, I guess we didn't see the ceremony, although I guess if you've been to a real one, they would be probably quite boring. And I can see how it would be very expensive to set up a scene of a graduation ceremony without any actual point to it, because we all know it's just going to be people watching other people walking across the stage. So I guess it does make sense that they skipped over that part and just show people returning home from it.
Well, also a graduation ceremony, unlike a wedding, you don't get a chance to show off beautiful gowns or whatever because everyone's in a cap and gown. So it's not quite as showy as a wedding or, a great big party of some kind.
So unfortunately we don't see Jade in this episode.
No.
She would have graduated with them.
Mm-hmm.
Lakin gets a call from Mark, who says he's not taking her to the prom. since apparently they broke up some time back, and Lakin assumed they'd still be going to the prom, but he's actually going with someone else. Lionel says that he'll take her, which Christy sees and can see from her eyes that her home life is not nearly as charming as the Lockridge's family life. Lakin and Christy go to the State Street Bistro. She says to Lakin that she has boys who are friends and guys that she sleeps with. And then she asks, have you and Ted ever? And then she asks, have you and anybody ever? And then she wonders who she's going to take to the prom. And she suggests Ted, who happens to be sitting right over there. Lakin says that she heard that he already has a date. So, Lakin sits with Ted and they chat, but they both dance around the fact that Lakin doesn't have a date. So Christy has to barge over there and basically say, Mark dumped her. She doesn't have a date. And that's enough for Ted to reveal that he actually lied. He doesn't have a date. He said, I decided a long time ago if I couldn't go with you, I wouldn't go with anyone else. And Lakin is grinning when she accepts his offer to go to the prom together. So I don't know if we'll see prom night depicted. Orient Express probably isn't ready to host any parties.
I'm hoping we see a little bit of it, maybe even if not the actual prom, maybe a couple scenes of them going to the prom or coming back to the prom from the prom or whatever. Just again, because that would be a little more showy. They would have all their nice dresses, and I would think certainly have lots of drama at a prom if that's where the writers wanted to go with things.
Yeah, I hope we see something. A guy with a lot of hair shows up at Nick's place. Pretending to have been in Vietnam and to know some fellow that Nick knows. But he's secretly recording their whole time together. And as they drink bourbon, he questions Nick about his Pulitzer Prize-winning photo and whether or not he still has it. And Nick says, no, I threw all that stuff out. He lets the guy stay there while he goes for his date with Kelly. And then the guy immediately starts searching the place for Nick's photo.
Yeah.
So he's looking for something in that. I'm thinking maybe something was caught in that photo that, someone doesn't want seen or something like that.
Yeah.
Hair guy then goes to the State Street Bistro and sits down at the table with Nick and Kelly.
And you can see that neither Nick nor Kelly are particularly happy to have him there crashing their date.
I may have misheard it, but Nick introduced him as Taylor Lint, which is not the same name he goes by later. I missed a second when they spot his wallet at one point and see his ID. Maybe he has a different name in there.
Yeah.
But the important thing about that is that it says he's a reporter, and he confesses to Nick that he's actually writing an article for a music magazine. So Nick's a little annoyed that this guy's taking advantage of that being a fellow Vietnam vet to do that, and then the guy reveals that he was actually a conscientious objector during the war, and they have a huge argument about the war, and Nick ends up punching him. Then later at Nick's place, Kelly is bandaging Nick's hand, and he actually does have all his old photos under the bed, and he shows them the one that he won the prize for, and tells the sad story about the boy being killed moments later due to a misunderstanding over something Nick told him to do. So we hear that eerie version of Bad Moon Rising again in the background of this scene. But meanwhile at the bistro, after being punched out by Nick, Taylor's wallet went flying and Christy picked it up. She manages to slip all the cash out of it into her pocket before handing the wallet back to him.
Yeah. Not that he seems to really notice or mind.
He invites her for a drink, and she goes, oh, well, all my men have black eyes. It's the 80s. But she says, better make it a Shirley Temple. I keep forgetting my ID. So I think that's a hint that she's actually too young to drink in California, which I don't know what that age is. I'm going to guess 21.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. And, with Christy, one thing I've been puzzling about a little bit too is whether she's actually going to school or not. Because, of course, as we've been discussing, we see Lakin and Ted having their graduation or we hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't think that Christy could afford Lyman Prep. So if she is going to school, I imagine it's whatever school maybe Danny was going to, but we haven't really heard of her going to school at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, I assume that that's something that they'll talk about, whether
Maybe.
she has a graduation or maybe she's been out of school for a year but hasn't done anything.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
So Christy and Taylor end up in a motel room, and we get to see and hear Aha's
Take on Me.
Take on Me on the big 4x3 screen. And Taylor is drinking, and he realizes that Christy is hesitant to have sex. And he says, "I don't blame you, I'm a fake." Just around the time that he passes out with a drink in his hand. And Christy says, "We have a lot in common, Mr. Ryder." Yeah, she calls him Mr. Ryder instead of Lynn, so maybe that was what was on the ID, and I missed that bit.
Yeah.
Lionel is annoyed that Frank took Augusta to Lakin's graduation. Lionel had to sit 5 rows behind them. Lionel gives Frank $300 to get a nice suit, and Frank comes back later to play classical music for Augusta, and he's reading notes about each of the pieces that Lionel wrote to him. He says things like, "The images this piece can conjure." He gets confused at one point about which notes go with which piece, and Augusta calls him on it, so they end up dancing. He puts on some different music to cover, and he invites her to feel his face, just as Lionel appears in the doorway and holds up a fist to Frank. Later on, Augusta's fallen asleep on the couch by herself. Oh yeah, that's right, because he's after Lionel holds up his fist, he says, "Oh, I need to go home to call Houston." So she falls asleep on the couch and wakes up to a Zimmerman's ad, while Lionel is actually skulking around there, and he contemplates turning off the TV so it doesn't wake her, but it's too late. She wakes up, and just then Lionel gets the hiccups, and Augusta realizes someone's in the room, and she grabs an old flintlock of Minx's off the mantle, threatens him, and calls the police, and they end up capturing Lionel on the grounds, and they bring him to the front door and say, "Oh, this man says he's your husband." And she says, "I'd know my own husband if I saw him." So I guess Lionel's been taken to jail.
Again?
Again. They should know him down there by now. Amy, who, as you might imagine, is hanging out at the State Street Bistro, says if anyone can help them, it's Jack Stanfield Lee. Brick looks unconvinced. So I think he's still not trusting Jack.
Well, I can see why. I have to say, it sort of surprises me that anyone is really trusting this version of Jack, because he just comes across as, he sort of oozes scumminess, I think.
They question Jack about what he found out in L.A., and Jack kind of half-assed his visit to the morgue, apparently. Didn't find out anything more than Brick had already found out. So, and then Jack says, "Oh, I know you don't trust me, Brick." So, kind of covering for the fact that he did nothing down in L.A. And just then the phone rings, and the bartender hands it to Amy, and it's Parker Simonson again. And he says, "It was very stupid to talk to a lawyer. You placed your child in serious danger, not to mention Mr. Lee. Just remember, we're watching." So Amy is actually quite disturbed by that call. Eden brings Jack the employee roster that she intercepted, and she points out that she's still upset with Maggie Gillis for, contributing to Joe's death, basically. I guess that kind of gives some impetus to for her as to why she's so zealously going after Maggie, when clearly her husband has had his life ruined by the Capwells. Then they talk about Sophia's case, and Eden says it's clear-cut because they have a witness. And Jack says, "A lunatic who tried to kill your father." So that's an interesting point there. Their only real witness is Marcello, who maybe will be dragged into court. to testify. But maybe Jack won't even. Maybe we won't even see Marcello because Jack will say there's no point because he's crazy. So yeah, that may actually be problematic for Sophia.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It's a good point.
Julia comes in. They've now moved to Jack's office by this point. And says, "Oh, you're after Eden Capwell now." She then reveals that she's working for Mason, and that Mason thinks she's coming to visit Jack to rekindle old flames and find out what he knows. So now we're like, oh, is Julia playing Mason? Jack asks if she's looking for a better offer, and she says, "You're the better offer," and puts her arms around his neck, and he gives her his hotel key. And then she says, "The roles are reversed this time. You need me, and all I want is to get you in the sack." Julia leaves, and Jack says, "Thanks again, Cousin Jack."
Mm-hmm.
Later at the hotel, they're in bed, and as they're kissing, Julia breaks it off, puts on her coat, and says, "I just wanted to let you know what you've been missing all these years," and walks out. So really, Jack is not really the beneficiary of her whole plan, so if they ever get Jack out of that dungeon, she's going to have to do all this over again.
Yeah, because at some point she's got to see that he does not have the same scars as the real Jack.
If she had waited a little longer for faux Jack to take off his shirt, she might have realized it's not Jack, but she didn't wait long enough. So I think real Jack's going to be in that dungeon a little while longer now. And that is it. We didn't think a lot happened in this episode, but when I was summarizing it, it was surprising how much actually there was.
And a few episodes back, I made the comment that I would really like to see someone have a last word with Eden, because she's always so sort of sure of herself. She always makes sure she gets the last word. But one thing we saw in this episode was that there is one person who can occasionally get the last word on Eden, and that is Kelly, who in her very gentle way really told Eden to mind her own business and to let her do things the way she wanted to do them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she actually did leave Eden a bit speechless at the end of their scene. So it can be done.
Mm-hmm. So we got to see Aha today, and this is actually the last appearance of Parker Simonson.
Ah.
So I think faux Jack will probably take over the lead of this storyline. I mean, now that we're starting to see more characters in New Stalen, maybe the action will move there a little bit. And I imagine at some point Amy and Brick will be taking a freighter to New Stalen to try and find John somehow.
I'm actually going to be really interested to see how this storyline plays out for a number of reasons, because it has a lot of interesting elements in it, but also because, in real life, I don't know how much longer Joel Crothers actually was in that role, so it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out if he has to leave the show at some point.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how long this story goes for. Longer than I thought, because when I was getting some screenshots for another character's spotlight on, I was surprised how far in the future this story was still happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's it for the Monday episode. I will be back after we watch episode 224. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Gazebo. Capwell's Psycho Gazebo.
Kelly Capwell's gonna die.
Goodbye, Kelly. Goodbye. I love you.
Kelly Perkins won't be long now.
You're telling me the girl that was here was not the courier? She saw you. And she got too good a look. She has to be silenced. Now she's to kill this Kelly Capwell. And she must do it quickly. But the timetable being the way it is, I think we have to proceed on our regular schedule. Now that gives you until Friday to handle the problem for us.
I don't need that much time.
No, I want you to do a careful job for us this time. See, this girl is the only girl that has seen Jack where he shouldn't be. And we'll all be safe as soon as she's been eliminated.
The girl that you're talking about killing is C.C. Capwell's daughter.
What possible difference does that make?
None. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of it.
Look, it would not matter to me if she were your daughter. Now, you understand? All right, that's it. You know what to do. Just contact me as soon as it's done.
Kelly Capwell's Psycho Gazebo welcomes Parker Simonson.
This one is far prettier than the others.
Welcome back. We have watched episode 224 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Tuesday, June 11th, 1985. Before we get into that, we should mention that we saw Lloyd Bochner, C.C. Capwell number 1, on Barnaby Jones the other night. He was a bad guy, as you might expect.
As he often was.
Much like C.C. Capwell is.
And I'm getting rewarded by an episode of Barnaby Jones after doing this podcast and watching another episode of Santa Barbara.
Yes. We'll see if there's any more Santa Barbara people in there. Madonna's Angel is playing as Lakin is getting dressed. She's trying on different dresses for the prom tonight. Ted climbs in her window just like he did when we first saw him last summer. And Ted brings Lakin a corsage and mentions that he has a job interview. Madonna is playing also for Christy, but she has Material Girl as her background music. And she is putting on Josh Young's jacket. So Josh Young is the name of the that reporter. It was kind of hard to hear because that scene was partly in French. And I had to watch it a few times to figure that out, that was his real name. And when she called him Mr. Ryder, she was actually saying Mr. Writer. And that's why I had misheard that his name was Ryder. So now that's all solved. Josh Young is his real name. Whatever his fake name was, Taylor something, is not real. Christy and Ted run into each other at the Orient Express, and they are both applying for jobs. Ted says he'll do anything, busboy waiter, to pay for his college. Remember, he's going to Stanford.
Yeah, that's quite a expensive school, I would think.
Christy is astounded at both that his parents aren't just paying for him and that he won't use his influence to get a cushy job, since his family does, after all, own the hotel and the restaurant. They both get interviewed, and Christy lists her temporary address as care of the Lockridges, 200 Park Lane, Montecito. So I was going to Google Maps that location to see if that maps to anything, but I never got around to it. I'll do that after this.
So I guess originally she was moving out of the Perkins because Amy was going to be coming home with the baby. Now that's not happening anymore, certainly not right away.
Well, that's
but
a good point.
It sounds like Christy's
Still at the Lockridge.
Yeah, I guess she's sort of settled in there, so that's where she is now.
Don't know if Minx and Christy have met.
We haven't seen
them together
No.
yet. Nick Hartley is planning to leave town, but Kelly convinces him to stick around a little bit because Eden has a job that needs a photographer. She shows up at his place and she gives him an antique camera that she's found and then asks for photography lessons. When they get to the Orient Express, that's where the job is, they run into Ted and Christy as they're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And Kelly says to them, "We're on assignment." So she's like in the mood for a caper or something.
Yeah.
Forgetting, of course, that people were trying to kill her just recently. Nick takes a bunch of photos, mostly involving Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't quite hear what the assignment was from Eden, but maybe it's just to take photos of the Orient Express, while Kelly appears to be in all the ones he took. Nick complains to Kelly later that all the pictures that they published from his Vietnam time were ones that made the war look heroic. And then she says that she doesn't think about her memories, she says she doesn't think her memories of Joe will ever fade, but she's trying, and you have to too, she says to Nick. Nick then tells her that the eyes are the most important thing when taking photos, and later when they're developing the photos, he's showing her, he says he can tell what a person is like from their eyes. And then she pulls out a picture of Joe from her wallet, I guess, and asks what he sees. Now this kind of, triggers something in Nick. Obviously he's interested in Kelly, and it seems that he doesn't think she's going to get over Joe, and so he says he's got to leave town when she pulls out the photo of Joe. But she says it would be better for both of them if he stays. So, I don't know, I think Kelly's developing an interest in Nick. Based on that, anyway. Mm-hmm. Kelly takes the photos for Eden after they're developed and says she'll return with his money. And he says, another good reason to stick around. So, I think he went from planning to leave town to maybe staying around a little. So, I don't know if he got some good vibes from Kelly on potentially their relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I was trying to remember, as you were doing your little recap, whether we heard Bad Moon Rising this time or not, because that seems to be...
I didn't write it down, so I don't think we did. They weren't looking at war pictures, they were looking at Kelly pictures. Anyway, Kelly seems to be a lot less depressed than she was for a long time, so it's nice seeing a bubbly Kelly.
And I think when I heard her talking to Nick and talking about how they both had to kind of keep trying and pushing on, it did make me think that Marcello, despite being crazy and homicidal and everything else, actually probably did really help Kelly quite a bit.
I think you're right. I wonder if she will come to that conclusion herself at some point, or if we'll ever hear them talk about Marcello again.
Yeah.
At La Puenta, or is it La Puerta? I'm sure it's La Puenta. The kooky girl, or at least she has kooky hair, maybe it wasn't that kooky in 1985, offers Gina another pill, and then says she's going to have to start charging. She urges Gina to borrow money from her upcoming visitor, and it turns out to be Mason, and he lends her $20. She gives him some story about why she might need some money, and he seems to buy it. Julia bails out Lionel, who you'll remember was arrested on the grounds of the Lockridge property yesterday. Lionel has a plan, so they stop off to get flowers and a diamond necklace for Augusta. They do that at the Capwell Hotel. Later on at home, Lionel shows up with a dress for Lakin. She's been trying on dresses for the prom all day, and it is a perfect dress, which Christy, I don't think, is entirely, bowled over by that. Another happy family exchange between father and daughter that she obviously doesn't have herself. The doorbell rings, and Christy offers to keep Ted company. Lakin asks Lionel if he and Augusta are ever going to get back together. Ted tells Christy he got the job, but she hasn't heard yet. So, sounds like possibly Christy was just not Orient Express material. I think she did ask Ted to put in a good word for her, but maybe that didn't happen, or wasn't sufficient.
Well, we don't really know what kind of experience, if any, she had either. She may not really...
Well, Ted had no experience. So.
Well, although he and Danny had worked at that
Oh, that's
place
true.
in
They did
Hollywood.
have the pizza
Yeah,
place
so-
experience.
He did actually have a little bit in that line of work.
When Lakin comes downstairs in her gown, Augusta pulls out a camera and asks Christy to take a photo of Ted and Lakin. Lionel, of course, is there. Augusta is not aware of it because, for those of you who've just tuned in, she's been blind for a few weeks. So Lionel sneaks into the photo, thinking that Augusta will find it a jolly jape when she finally can see the photo. Later, at the prom, Ted is annoyed that Lakin was dancing with someone else, and takes Lakin outside and says they can have their own prom somewhere else. She says only if they can come back later, because she was actually having a good time there. Ted takes her to the Orient Express, which is closed, and he notices that she's not really into this private prom that he thought would be such a great idea.
Yeah.
She says that she didn't want to leave the party. And it was fun dancing with everyone. I don't want to shut out everybody else in my life, she says. When we broke up, I was completely alone. Ted says, well, we're not going to break up again. And Lakin says, we don't know that. Ted says, well, when we go away to Stanford, I'll give you your space. To which Lakin replies, well, because of my mother's blindness, I'm not going to Stanford. I'm going to USB, which is the University of Santa Barbara. Which I don't know if it's a real university or not.
I don't know. There's one in
There's UCSB, University of California at Santa Barbara. But I don't know if there is
I'm
a
assuming
USB.
that's what it is, actually.
Another
That was
thing,
my assumption.
Another thing to research.
Yeah.
She says, I'm pre-registering next week. Ted says the only reason he chose Stanford is so they could be together. He says he'll switch to USB instead. Lakin says that he should still go to Stanford and they can just see each other on vacations. And he's not happy about that at all. And she says she doesn't want to get into the same thing as before. Ted says, I'm making all my plans around you. And Lakin says, I need time to develop my own individuality. Don't you understand that? Ted says, the only thing I understand is that I love you, and I want to make love to you. Now, if I know Lakin Lockridge, I think I do, she's going to take that the wrong way, I have a feeling. I have a feeling she's going to say, you just want to have sex with me, and that's going to put another several-week detour in their love story. What do you think? Or do you think she thinks, well, it's prom night, maybe we should?
No, Lakin tends to be a bit fusty about these things. So I think if there's a wrong way to take something, she will take it, generally.
Yeah. I don't know. I just have a bad feeling. I think I actually have a bit of a memory from 35 years ago. Well, I have a general memory of just being constantly frustrated by the lack of forward motion in the Ted Lakin relationship, so I strongly suspect this was one of those things that's going to lead to another delay.
Well, and it does seem like Christy is ready, willing, and able to go at any time, so I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Ted manages to work through his frustrations with her rather than Lakin.
That's certainly something that, as things stand right now, the writers seem to be presenting to us.
Now, there was all sorts of possibility with Ted's teacher at one point, Miss Parks.
Who hasn't been mentioned, which wasn't mentioned in the graduation episode, and what's the prom episode now? It'll be the last time we hear of Lyman Prep, so unless they mention Miss Parks leaving, maybe Danny will show up, or Jade, and they'll say, oh, I heard Miss Parks went back to San Diego or something.
Yeah.
That may be another one of those loose threads. Maybe at the end maybe for our year in review at the end of July, we'll go through all of the dropped storylines or basically things that had no proper closure.
Like
there weren't a lot, but there were a few.
The bomb.
The bomb. The extra Andrades. The person who bunked Joe on the head. There's a handful of unresolved things. Christy calls her mother, and the most important thing she says during that call is, how much do you need? So, Christy's, Christy's on the run from, or not the run, but living on the street. So obviously things are bad, but, sometimes you don't know if it's the kid or the parents. So this sounds like the parent here is in need of money, and it's not the first time. So maybe there's an environment there that Christy either can't go back to or just doesn't want to go back to. She doesn't want to deal with possibly a parent who's, out of money, possibly on drugs, possibly a drunk.
It sounds like she has a pretty transactional relationship with her mom, and that she's a kid and having to give her mom money, whenever they talk. So.
Christy says, Augusta and Christy discuss her home after that call, and Christy says it's a very bad scene there. So that sounds, we can put some pieces together. Maybe the mom's got a boyfriend or something that's also trouble. Don't know. Or maybe Christy's dad is there and he's also a drunk. So while she's talking to Augusta, Christy steals some candlesticks that look like they're silver, and all the while offering to pay for her own meals. Augusta seems not entirely welcoming of Christy. She says, I think you'll be happier with family, even though she's just been told it's a bad scene there. So I think Augusta wants Christy out of the house, which is kind of interesting, because, there's no real reason not to be charitable to her, I guess, but maybe she just doesn't like strangers in the house.
If we remember from the early kind of couple months of the show, Augusta was very protective of Lakin and didn't really want her traveling to Los Angeles to visit Ted or anything like that. So I think it's possible that she sees Christy as a bad influence in some ways.
That could be.
And plus, we know that Augusta is very jealous of Lionel, so it's possible that she doesn't really like to have any extra females around, even though he's technically out of the house. We also know that Augusta has never really warmed up to any of Warren's girlfriends and doesn't really like Warren having a lot of relationships, or at least not in her presence. Remember, she was very cool towards Summer, for example. So it could just be that Augusta just really doesn't like having an extra female presence.
Because she actually did check to make sure that Julia was still homely too at one point.
Yeah, and I think at some point, whenever Augusta regains her eyesight, and I don't know if that's just the way her condition is projected to progress, that eventually she will slowly get her eyesight, or if at some point she'll get a bonk on the head or something like that. But I'm sure she will have a bit of a surprise when she actually sees Julia for the first time.
I think so. So Christy says that she's got to go see someone about a job, and in reality we see her pawning the candlesticks. I wonder if that's the same pawn shop that Warren went to all those months ago. Lionel sees the suit that Frank bought and wonders what he spent the $300 on. Frank says that he's falling for Augusta, which Lionel's not too happy about. So Lionel's plan is for Frank to give Augusta the roses and the diamond necklace that he bought earlier. And Frank reads from Lionel's cue cards, as he has many times before. And Augusta asks Frank to kiss her. Now, apparently this is something Lionel's been expecting. So he has Frank get up, changes jackets with him, puts on his cologne, sends Frank home, and changes places with Frank and kisses Augusta. This would not fly today, I don't think.
No, well, it was something that kind of reminded me of whenever they have one of those plots on Days of Our Lives where Marlena's double shows up and just completely fools the entire town for several months. And I feel like I would recognize you even if I was blind.
Well, I mean, they did not show us Augusta's reaction. Perhaps she does realize it's Lionel. You know, we may see her realize it's Lionel and kick him out, or possibly realize it's Lionel and not kick him out, which I think maybe is what Lionel's hoping.
Mm-hmm.
Mason and Jack Stanfield Lee, faux Jack Stanfield Lee, are meeting in the lobby of the Capwell Hotel at one of the little tables they have set up there. Mason sees Julia and goes to tell her that Jack has the employee list in his briefcase. Julia goes to Jack and asks why he's working at a table in the lobby. And he says that the office's carpets are being shampooed. It's done twice a year. Jack gets called away. Possibly Mason maybe made a fake call. I don't know. But it leaves Julia alone with Jack's briefcase, and she steals the employee list. I think she leaves him a little note in the folder, as well as leaving him a note on the table that says, dinner tonight? Or dinner tonight. Later, Mason tells Julia that she's looking good, because she's gone to change for her dinner with Jack. She gives Mason the list and says, I'm going to wipe that self-satisfied look off his face. Well, Mason says, I would love to hear what he did to deserve this. Some night? When the lights are out, maybe? Thanks for this. She says, I didn't do it for you. After their dinner at the Capwell Hotel, Julia gets up to go, and Jack says, I thought you promised me dessert. She says, I have to get back to Augusta. So, once again, Jack is a little left high and dry by Julia. And when Julia leaves, Jack gets into the elevator and instinctively lights a cigarette. But as the elevator doors are closing, Kelly Capwell comes around the corner and sees faux Jack Stanfield Lee lighting a cigarette and says, that's him. That's the man in the house. So I think Kelly's days of not being hunted by an assassin were short-lived.
I think so.
But I don't think Jack saw her, because he was looking off to the side and downwards. So I don't think he knows that Kelly saw her.
Yeah, I can see
him.
Kelly maybe pulling Nick into a fascinating new adventure.
Oh, that's right, because he hasn't been involved in it, has he? It was Cruz that was helping investigate earlier. Yeah, that'll be another caper for them to get involved in if they manage not to get killed.
Yeah.
Fun. Maybe Nick can take photos of Jack and do something. Well, that is it for episode 224. We will be back after watching episode 225 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
Interesting woman. Wonder if she's noticed how much we have in common.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've watched episode 225, originally aired Wednesday, June 12th, 1985. Now, one thing I should mention is that Parker Simonson's last episode was 223, so we won't be seeing him again.
I guess faux Jack Stanfield Lee will be doing his own heavy work, or he will hire someone else.
Augusta, as you'll recall, was kissing Lionel, who she thought was Frank. And she starts talking to Lionel, but of course he can't respond, because otherwise that would give the game away. Luckily, around that time, Julia finds Frank on the porch, waiting, and they enter the Lockridge house, and Julia bails Lionel out by talking to Augusta and distracting her long enough so that Frank and Lionel can switch jackets again, and Frank can take his place and promptly say, "Oh, I gotta go, Augusta." Later at the State Street Bistro, Lionel says to Frank that they need a new plan. Lionel also runs into Sophia there, and she apologizes to him for all the, trying to frame him for murder stuff. And he says he wants to be friends, and she wishes him well with Augusta. Back home, Augusta complains to Julia for barging in. She says, "Do I have to put a slip on my door, just like in the dorm room?" And Julia discusses the various merits of Frank and Lionel, and Julia says, in Lionel's own way, he adores you. And Augusta says, Lionel is a disease. The only way to cure it is to fall in love with someone else. Lionel returns and plays a cassette with I've Got a Crush on You for Augusta, which is a song that was playing the night they married. Lionel tries to get her to dance, but she says she doesn't want any memories from him. He asks her to spend the day with him on their upcoming anniversary. Instead, Augusta asks Frank to spend the day with her. Frank lets Lionel know that is the case, and Lionel needs to come up with a new plan, I guess. And later we see Augusta listening to the song and wistfully staring blindly off into the distance.
So, that actually might be a good sign for Lionel down the road.
Mm-hmm. Kelly tells Nick that she saw the man who looked like Jack Stanfield Lee smoking in the elevator. They talk through the whole series of events of, her seeing him in the house, and they actually quickly figure out the whole thing. And then, because it's late and they can't really call Cruz at this time of the night, Nick suggests a foot massage to help Kelly relax.
Smooth.
She falls asleep during the massage, and at one point he contemplates taking photos of her, but he changes his mind while she's sleeping. And she wakes up calling Joe's name, and she's really annoyed that he let her fall asleep. Then Nick says that he's been thinking, and they should hold off on telling Cruz what they've discovered until they get the evidence. So, basically what I was predicting would happen did happen. They've got a little caper going on. Nick suggests that they rent the place across the street from Jack Stanfield Lee's office and set up a telephoto lens and take pictures of him and try and get some evidence of him smoking and maybe what's really going on.
Yeah. And I would think that once Julia finally sees him without his shirt on and realizes he doesn't have the appropriate scars, if she ever gets together with Nick and Kelly, they could start to build quite a convincing case against him.
Mm-hmm. I don't think Julia's met Nick or Kelly, has she?
No, she hasn't.
She hasn't met very many people in the cast yet.
No.
So, yeah, we'll see. Julia calls Jack to say she left one of Augusta's earrings at his place. It's not entirely clear if she did that on purpose or if she really even did. Maybe there's a photo of her with both earrings that I missed that could prove it. She ends up crawling around on the floor of his place and while looking for it, and he kisses her, and she says, "The reason that I'm not sleeping with you is that I'm not interested enough to bother." And then she says he doesn't kiss like he used to. The spark is dying. Now, I don't know if she's just, she's actually cottoned on to that, or she's just come up with another way to insult him, which is clearly the plan of all of their interactions. She shows that she's found the earring, which appears to have been in her hand the whole time. So she leaves, and then the faux Jack Stanfield Lee says to himself, "Don't let her get to you. You're the best. You will measure up to Jack Lee in more ways than one." So this sounds like Cousin Jack and him have had a long-standing competition in the family over things.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of faux Jack Field Lee's motivation for this whole, being involved in this whole thing is really a long-held grievance against the real Jack Stanfield Lee, and maybe some deeply held insecurities about his own abilities, whatever his real name really is.
Well, maybe they were always competing for things as kids, and this makes me think that he may actually be a lawyer then, if Jack was going into law and he wanted to try and best Jack at something. So that probably makes sense that he is a lawyer too, because he's doing too much legal stuff. At the Orient Express, which is closed for the night, Ted and Lakin are having their own private prom. Ted says he wants to be with Lakin, and she mentions having protection, and Ted assumes it's because she slept with Mark, and and they argue about that, and Ted leaves. So once again, the pendulum of Ted and Lakin is swung in the opposite direction. Ted realizes he doesn't have his key and goes to the State Street Bistro looking for Mason. He runs into Christy there, who's on a date. Ted asks Eden to hire Christy. I guess Eden's hanging out at the State Street Bistro at 2 in the morning again.
Well, everyone else is.
I mean, Nick had said it was too late to contact Cruz, so it must be pretty late at night. But a lot of stuff's happening in Santa Barbara at this late hour.
I don't remember Santa Barbara having sort of a huge...
A vibrant nightlife.
Yeah.
Maybe there's that one little strip. Eden agrees to hire Christy. Eden's obvious concerns were, how do I know she's even going to show up on time? And she doesn't have any experience. So. Later, Christy returns to the bistro saying her date was a dud. And she and Ted end up playing Ted's video game for a while. Ted gives her the good news that Eden offered her the job. And they head over to the Orient Express to pick up their uniforms. So Ted had, a short window for him and Lakin to spend in the deserted Orient Express before the 2 a.m. trying on clothing shift came in. Mm-hmm. So they go over and they've all got, black pants and white shirt and bright red blazers, which I assume are mimicking outfits worn on the real Orient Express, or maybe they're just what NBC had in the props cupboard.
Yeah.
But they try them on, and they look kind of fusty, and Christy decides to make hers a little sexier, so she takes off the shirt and just has the vest on underneath, and she's made it just about as sexy as possible, just as Lakin walks in. But instead of Lakin walking out, as I expected would happen, she hands Christy the car keys and tells her to go home. And then Lakin and Ted are once again alone at the Orient Express. And she tells Ted that if he hasn't figured it out already, that she did not sleep with Mark and that she had bought that protection a long time ago for her and Tad. And then Ted apologizes, of course, for being Ted. And Lakin says that she's scared to sleep with Ted. She says, with Mark, it would have just been something to learn about. With you, it just wouldn't be my body. So, that's not a full-blown yes from Lakin yet. So, who knows if prom night will end successfully for both of them. But it's only a Wednesday show, so maybe Friday will be an exciting Ted and Lakin getting together finally after a year.
Yeah. I mean, I assume they will get together at some point, because we've been waiting for it for a really long time, and I think we're going to be waiting a little longer, so I would assume at some point our patience will be rewarded.
Looking back on it in hindsight and thinking a little bit about writing a soap opera and different types of characters, I realize, of course, that that's the whole point of Ted and Lakin. They're one of those couples that the writers will string us along with. Mm-hmm. And then Cruz and Eden is that couple who keeps breaking up and getting back together. And then Kelly is that girl who can never catch a break with her boyfriends. So when you look back at that in hindsight, maybe it's a little easier to take some of the very frustrating things that happen with our favorite characters. So.
Well, soap operas aren't really designed to have endings, so...
Yeah, that's true, and that's something that maybe when you're 17 or when you're just starting out on the soap opera, you're not thinking about. But now, after 35 years of hindsight, I can maybe appreciate some of those things. But that is it for that episode. Anything else we wanted to talk about? We did look up 200 Park Lane in Montecito to see exactly where the Lockridges live. And Montecito appears to be about 3 kilometers from the waterfront of Santa Barbara, so it's just looks like an adjacent suburb. I don't know if I showed you that map that I looked up.
No.
But Park Lane doesn't appear to go as low as 200. It starts in the 600s or the 700s, and it does wind along right on the edge of the mountains. So those canyons that are on the Capwell estate and caves and tunnels could certainly be in that area of Montecito if you assume that one of those many mansions on that lane is a Capwell one and one is a Luckridge one, with just the address being a little bit fudged to avoid giving a real address. So I guess that helps when the Dobsons actually live in Santa Barbara.
I was going to say, I assume the people putting the show together were very familiar with Santa Barbara. It's not far from Los Angeles, and a lot of people who work in Los Angeles, if they're wealthy enough, do also live in Santa Barbara. So it's kind of a known. I'm sure the people putting it together have a really good idea of what Santa Barbara is really like. So
when I put the address in on Google Maps, it stopped me on a random point on the road because it wasn't a real address, and the first thing I saw was a gate with a big house further back from the street, and then quite a long ways before the next address. So these are very large properties with quite a ways in between them. So. And that is it. So we'll be back after we watch the Thursday episode 226 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
bye-bye.
Welcome back. We finished episode 226 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Thursday, June 13th, 1985. And it's a hot day already in Santa Barbara. And the air conditioning is out at the Capwell Hotel. At lunch at the Orient Express, Eden tells CC that she's not planning to get back together with Cruz. That's all they talk about. That's all the talk about Cruz, just that one little sentence. In the lobby, Kelly is spying on Jack talking with Julia by looking over a newspaper like a spy. Nick comes up behind her and tells her that she's not really being inconspicuous. Kelly decides to just break into Jack's office, because I guess she has keys. And before they can go in, Amy and Brick arrive. So they go across the street to the new spy shack they rented. And they set up their telephoto lens, and Kelly has binoculars, and they spend the whole day spying on Jack's office. Back at the office, Amy is angry with Brick. Well, she's angry because she wants her baby, and she's fed up with Brick's theories and questioning who John's father is, because I guess he's back to wondering, why was Jeff sterile? Jack ends up telling her later that there's lots of ways to fake medical reports.
Yeah.
And then he comes up with a theory that perhaps Jeff was involved in a baby selling scheme.
Sounds plausible, given what we know.
I know. It's a spot-on guess by Faux Jack Stanfield Lee. Where that's going to lead, I don't know. I guess they're going to maybe fake some trail to a dead end, something like that. It's very hot in Maggie's house. We think maybe it's a different actor playing Ben. He didn't quite look the same. She and Warren have a lot of dialogue about the heat, and I think there may have been some double meanings there. They end up going to the Capwell Hotel because they have to meet the Capwell employee who was on the rig that day of the explosion. And they meet a man who looks like he's working as a janitor or something at the Capwell Hotel.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem like that? It's Mr. Schechter, and he says the poor devils in operations were the only ones who saw anything. So this might be another part of the trail to find out someone who witnessed something. So, but he can't give them any more, and he actually says that Capwell took care of all of their employees who were in the blast. So I guess everyone's been given jobs throughout Capwell Enterprises, and maybe some of them who saw something were given a little extra.
Yeah. Now we don't know if there were a lot of people who were maybe injured to the point where they couldn't be just sort of bought off with new jobs. I mean, obviously Ben wouldn't be able to work again. Whether there were others, I don't recall, but obviously Ben was not going to be bought off with a new job. He's certainly not in any condition for that.
Mm-hmm. I guess Schechter was the guy who injured his hand. I don't know if that was evident from the scenes he was in. But I think that's the guy they were talking about a few days ago who'd injured his hand. So Warren figures this is a dead end, and then he suggests that he and Maggie go swimming to try and get out of the heat. And he also urges Maggie to get 24-hour care for Ben. I don't know if that's permanent or just for today, because he wants to spend time with her. But she says she can't afford it, and of course he offers to pay for it, but she declines. And then she just agrees to see him later. But she's basically angry with him for constantly trying to kiss her, because he knows that eventually she's going to succumb. She later tells Warren that she sent Ben back to the hospital for the day. So he seems to think that means that she wants him to come over. But Maggie then gets upset when Warren kisses her and runs off and says she never wants to see him again. But later on in the day, he comes by her house anyway. And she tells him to get lost. Instead, he breaks down the door. And then they kiss.
You know, it hasn't really occurred to me before, although I think you talked yesterday about some of the patterns in the show, but it's almost like Warren and Maggie have a little bit of the same dynamic as Ted and Laken, in that they are drawn to each other, and then they pull apart, and then they're drawn again.
Gina finds out that Cece had removed her phone privileges, which is kind of nasty. That kooky girl gives her another pill. Cece arrives with a letter from Brandon, and as she reads it, Gina is annoyed to hear how nice Sophia is. Gina asks for another pill to help her sleep, and the kooky girl says that she's out of them. Well, Gina grabs her, because she really needs one, and Kooky calls her a junkie.
Yeah, so we're really seeing Kookie's true colors coming out in this scene.
At the Orient Express, where everyone's having lunch, Cece tells Mason that Gina is progressing nicely. Mason says, that's not the Gina I saw. Cece says, keep your medical opinions to yourself. Mason says, I thought you'd care about your wife, but then you have another. Mason goes to visit Gina and finds her freaking out. And an administrator and an orderly end up taking her away screaming, and Mason is concerned. Kelly asks Nick what it was like being a secret agent, and he says, I started seeing things that weren't really there. I wonder if this is some sort of deeper psychological problem that Nick has that we're not aware of, that may spring out in the future.
I think that's possible. The other thing I thought about was, when we first see Nick and Cruz talking, he's talking about how he left the service because he was convinced of something that couldn't be proven. So I was wondering if that was maybe harking back to that.
But then didn't they say that he proved to be right in the end? So I don't know, but there may be other things. Plus there's this thing with fire. So he may have some other things that bubble to the surface as time goes on, I think.
I have a feeling we're going to be hearing Bad Moon Rising again.
Hopefully he won't go crazy and end up in Kelly's Psycho Gazebo. Kelly goes to Jack's office, just as faux Jack Stanfield Lee is taking some cigarettes out of his desk, and he quickly slams the drawer and closes it when he sees Kelly. Kelly pretends she's there because Cece and Eden are just getting her to pitch in. She's not really working at the hotel, but because of the air conditioning problem, she's just checking on the various tenants.
Is she still working at La Mesa?
Presumably she could be. She's living back at the mansion, right? Because Mason and Ted are living at Sally's apartment. But is Sally still working at La Mesa? Probably. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she's on, leave. Stress leave. she maneuvers faux Jack towards the window so that Nick can get a good photo of him with the telephoto lens. So, not sure what they think they can get from that. Do they suspect it's someone pretending to be Jack, and that photo will show that it's not? Because clearly all the people who've met him think he's Jack. But who knows? Who knows what they're going to do with that photo? It'll be, it's not the first time I've thought, how's this going to play out? And then 10 seconds into the next episode, it's like, oh, yeah, we got the ID back. It's could be Jack's cousin.
Well, we're still waiting for that yacht to blow up.
Brick shows up in the evening to find out why Amy hasn't been home for dinner. And Amy tells Brick Jack's theory that Jeff might have been involved in a baby stealing scheme. And she declines a ride home because she's still angry with Brick. And Brick slams the door as he leaves. Christy asks Lakin how her date was, and says that she got in at 4 a.m. and Lakin wasn't in yet, so it must have gone well. But Lakin says she and Ted got into a fight. Oh, who could have guessed that was going to happen? So Christy gets Lakin to call Ted. She calls for him, and he's not there. He's actually at the Capwell Hotel, but he is calling her simultaneously, and he gets a busy signal. So Christy suggests to Lakin that she be more daring. And Lakin says that if she had just jumped into bed with Ted, it would have ruined the whole thing. Christy doesn't understand that, but she tells Christy that someday she'll feel the same way about a guy.
This actually harks back for me to some of the early conversations we used to see with Lakin and Jade.
But in this case, you get the feeling maybe that guy will be Ted if Christy's interest in him is, more at a higher level than all the other guys she's dating.
And we also know that Christy's not kind of bluffing the way Jade was as well. Jade was putting up
anti-Jade.
Jade was putting up a really, strong front, but we know that, she actually hadn't done the deed or wasn't really quite as daring as she was letting on, whereas we're pretty sure now that Christy's actually walked the talk.
Christy suggests to Lakin that she carry protection with her at all times so that she's always ready. But then she has to run off because it's her first day of work. And next thing you know, we see Christy and Ted in a line with about 4 others being taught how to make, I'm guessing, the chef's salad. And even though, they're being very interruptive by Christy asking, how to go with Lakin and stuff like that, I think the chef somewhat overreacts. Not necessarily about the fact that they're interrupting him, but when he tastes their salads to see if they've been really paying attention, he says, they taste like garbage. Well, they've basically been putting all the same ingredients in the bowl in the same order that he has. And they've just been piled on top of each other, so I'm not sure how some random pinch of whatever he pulled out of there could taste like garbage.
I was actually a bit puzzled by that scene, not that I really know much about the backroom workings of high society restaurants, but I wasn't sure that the wait staff would usually be putting together the food.
I think sometimes they'll throw on a garnish at the end. I've seen that before, but this seemed to be like a large percentage of the salad was being prepared by the waiters. So the chef yells at them, and Eden, obviously is attracted to that sound and gives Ted a nasty look about both him and Christy, who he vouched for. Then later, she's not too happy about Christy's stripped-down version of her uniform that she tries out. Tells Christy to put her proper red jacket back on. This is a restaurant, not a strip joint, she says. Then we cut to lunchtime, whereas several of our characters are having lunch, and Christy messes up several meals, but shows Ted that she can make up for it by flirting with the customers. And she actually tries it out on CC, whose meal she slightly screwed up. And to Eden's annoyance, it works. So, Lake and Julia and Warren also show up for lunch. And Lakin avoids looking at Ted by covering her face with the menu. Eventually, Warren and Julia get up for various reasons, and Ted tries sitting with Lakin to talk to her, but the head waiter comes over and yells at him about Christy being out of uniform and about him sitting with the customers, and Lakin runs out before he can really talk to her. Mason tells Julia she looks positively stunning, and she says that's because she's having a rendezvous with Jack in his office tonight. Mason suggests it's probably best if they not be seen together. Then he also has the counterproductive suggestion that you and I instead of you and Jack. Julia says, if I don't go with Jack, you can forget your strategy. And she also says, you and I are an awful lot alike. And Mason says, I've been looking for a woman like me all my life.
That was my favorite line of the episode.
So I think every scene with Julia and Mason has been gold. So I think that the casting people did a really good job there.
Yeah.
Julia later meets Jack. Kelly and Nick are watching from across the street as Julia and Jack kiss. And they make some jokes. And then Nick starts taking photos, jokingly. And that is how it ends.
Now, I'm wondering, we were sort of speculating on what all these photos of faux Jack might mean, but maybe if he and Julia get really hot and heavy, they'll actually take a photo of him that shows the telltale scar is not there.
Even if Julia doesn't notice it somehow, perhaps the photo will have it, and then, I don't know, I think Julia should be the one who identifies that it's missing. But I can't imagine Kelly or Nick showing her the photos, so maybe Julia stumbles across the photos accidentally. Nick and Kelly hide them in a briefcase that gets swapped around and Julia opens it or something. It's probably not going to be a direct thing. There's probably going to be some, a photo of Jack floating around that just barely misses catching Julia's eye or something like that for several weeks.
Well, I'm sure they'll milk it for quite a while.
Yeah. Unless, of course, Julia actually does just take off his shirt and realizes it tomorrow. And that is it for this episode. It's kind of a fun Thursday. And, Nick and Kelly's wacky capers are, underway. And Mason and Julia's interesting capers are underway. And Ted and Christy are having wacky capers at the Orient Express. So it looks like a wacky summer for a lot of our characters.
Yeah. I think there's all sorts of potential here for a really interesting summer.
I think Gina will be having the worst summer of the cast, I guess.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out, because I think that it's interesting because I'm wondering where it will go with Cookie. If she doesn't have any money, she obviously, unlike her problems before where she was sort of free to go to people like Hank and get money, she's confined to an institution. So her options for getting money, if she can't get it from CC or one of the family, are quite limited. So I'm wondering how this will escalate.
I think she'll have to try and ask Mason for money. It's unlikely she'd ask CC for it. So.
But I mean, Mason doesn't have any. Like, I'm just trying to think of it from Cookie's perspective. If Gina can't get money through CC or any of the other family, what comes next with Gina?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I assume she's not the only one she's selling drugs to, so maybe she's just pushing each person that she sells to towards, getting money however they can, If enough of them bite, I guess she makes a good living. I don't know. So we will see. When we watch episode 227 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Well, if it isn't frickin' Frank.
Welcome back.
Hello.
This is episode 227 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. And we watched episode 227 of Santa Barbara, which aired June 14th, 1985. We watched this one on September 9th, the 35th anniversary of my grandfather's death, which we will get to when we get to the September episodes. Julia takes off her dress. As you'll remember, she was kissing faux Jack Stanfield Lee in his office with Kelly and Nick spying. Kelly recognizes her as Augusta's sister. Nick thinks that Jack is likely to light up afterwards. And as he keeps gawking through his telescope, Kelly covers his eyes and says, well, look afterwards. Nick sees from her body language that he doesn't think Julia's planning to stay. And he's proved right, because Julia starts to put her dress back on and leaves. A frustrated faux Jack Stanfield Lee lights a cigarette, which is what Kelly and Nick have been waiting for. They watch him take the keys to the filing cabinet out of the desk and open the filing cabinet and take out a folder and make some notations. And when he leaves the office, Nick decides to break in and see what's in that folder. And he copies down a bunch of information for it and manages to get it locked back up in the filing cabinet, but doesn't get out in time because Jack has come back. So he pretends to be a Swedish guy that has had an appointment with Jack since before he left for Europe, and I guess maybe faux Jack thinks it could be real because maybe he hadn't quite taken over Jack's life yet at that time. So he goes to the outer office to check the calendar on Amy's desk. This gives Nick some time to quickly write a note to Kelly and tape it to the window. It says, call office now, and Kelly spots that, and of course, not having a mobile telephone, she has to run back across the street to the lobby of the Capwell Hotel to use the phone. Meanwhile, Nick stalls as Jack threatens to call the police, and finally the phone rings, and Kelly manages to distract faux Jack for a second, and when he turns around, Nick has gone. He chases Nick into the lobby, but Nick and Kelly are hiding behind a pillar, and he ends up not finding them. Kelly and Nick go back to their spy shack and look at the notes that Nick took, and he says that there's a notation next to a shipment on April 23rd that reads late. Now that is the day that Kelly came back from Bermuda. So the list of shipments makes them suspicious. I think they're going to figure out some kind of smuggling maybe that's been going on. We're actually not quite sure what it was yet, though, are we? Because that was never really revealed for us.
No, this seems to be a multifaceted operation because we know that they have been involved in taking Amy's baby and apparently giving it to the wealthy monarch or some wealthy family in a faraway land. So we know they're involved in that, but this shipment is a whole different thing, and it really hasn't been talked about very much since we first were introduced to this plot back when Kelly was coming back from the Bahamas.
It'd be interesting to see how it ties in, if the smuggling does tie in or if it's just a totally separate thing. Faux Jack returns to his office to finish his cigarette and contemplate the events surrounding Nick Hartley. And then he spots the note still taped to the window, and he takes it off and sees it's a note facing out, so he realizes what must have been meant for someone outside, and he looks. And he sees Nick and Kelly across the street in the window reading through their notes. So I think Nick and Kelly are going to be in trouble.
It's an interesting oversight in a way because they are just across the street. You'd think that they might have noticed that they had left the note up there. And perhaps taken some measures to take it down or do something.
Yep, so I think faux Jack might send some thugs over there in the next episode.
And we should mention, although we're certainly going to talk about other elements of today's episode, this is actually the scene that ends the episode. And since this is a Friday, this is what we would consider, I guess, the cliffhanger episode of the week.
Mm-hmm. Back at, I'm guessing, yes, Maggie's house. Maggie throws a vase at Warren because, once again, she's not happy that he's pursuing her when he knows that she's married. At one point during their argument, he says she's treating her husband as less than human. He says, if I were him, I would want you to be happy, or something of that nature. She says she wants to go for a drive, and they end up driving out to the beach. And she sits on the beach while he goes for a swim, and then they notice their tire's flat, so he changes the tire, and during all that she starts fantasizing about him. And in the end she cannot resist and ends up kissing Warren, and they end up lying down on the beach at the end of the scene. And when we come back, they're sitting on the beach, and Warren says he loves her, and she says, "You're right, ... So he's right about one of the things he said during the day. I assume it's that maybe she should treat her husband differently and maybe put him in 24-hour care, or maybe she'll do the exact opposite and decide to shut Warren out completely. It's hard to tell.
I doubt if it'll be the resolution of things, regardless which way it ends up going.
Augusta is looking for her keys in that little desk that's right at the front of the set. And as she's sitting there, she notices the orange glow from the desk lamp that's right at eye level. And she realizes that she can see the light. And actually throughout the episode, as she tries looking at various things, her eyesight seems to be coming back quite quickly. Because at one point she picks up a framed photo and sees sort of a washed-out image, which she's trying to figure out who it is. I suspect it's one of the Lionel photos that she'd had removed that someone snuck back. So that's how she spends her time alone, because no one else is in the house today. Where is everyone? Well, Lionel and Frank are at the Capwell Hotel, reserving the honeymoon suite for next week, to the amusement of the desk clerk, whose name, according to Kelly, is Jerry. Lionel also buys out the entire inventory of a woman with a rose cart. And then Julia runs into them and says, well, if it isn't frickin' Frank, what are you going to do to Augusta now? So they don't tell her, and they decide, she says she's going to tell Augusta everything, so they run out after her. And Frank has one of the bouquets of roses in his hand and hands it to Eden on the way out. Eden is working the night shift, and Mrs. Carmody comes off the elevator to complain that her jewels have been stolen. And who shows up from the police department but Cruz Castillo, which Eden finds annoying, because obviously he didn't need to attend a simple robbery like this, and he just did it so he could hang out with her. Anyway, hours later, he's still thoroughly investigating, so he's gotten to hang out a lot with Eden, and they go to Mrs. Carmody's room together, which Kelly actually spots on her binoculars as she's examining the building. Mrs. Carmody says to him that the place isn't as good as it used to be, what with the broken air conditioning and all the jewel thieves. So, I actually recall there being a jewel theft, but I don't remember it being Mrs. Carmody, so I think we've got at least one more. And so maybe this is actually a longer storyline of the jewel thief.
Yeah.
One thought I had was, could it be Christy moonlighting from her other job? Because we saw her steal those candlesticks from the Lockridges a couple days ago, and she's now working on the rooftop restaurant of the Capwell Hotel, so she would have access to the building. So,
yeah, I thought, and especially if it happens again, that this might tie into another one of our storylines somehow.
I have no memory of how it went or the resolution. I just remember the one episode where someone's jewels were stolen, and it was a different character. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see actually this play out, because I don't remember anything about it. Eden ends up giving Cruz back his engagement ring, which he, I guess, was not expecting. I think even if it's not Christie, she may end up getting suspected of it, because Eden doesn't really like her to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm assuming that this whole little scenario, I was trying to think, what it might connect with. Obviously, it's an opportunity for Cruz and Eden to have another conversation, and for Eden to give Cruz's engagement ring back. Possibly the burglar will tie into another storyline. I also thought it was kind of interesting, the comment that the Capwell Hotel was going downhill because of the air conditioning and the thieving, and we already know that prostitutes hang out in the lobby there all the time.
That's true, from last year, yeah.
I don't know if that could have any ramifications for future storylines at all. But yeah, it was an interesting comment that was very definitively thrown in there. So.
We find out Mrs. Carmody is a recent widow, and don't know how long she's planning to stay at that hotel. Frank and Lionel make it to the Lockridge house before Julia can get inside, and they beg her not to tell Augusta. Lionel, she says she will, so Lionel asks her to keep quiet if Augusta answers a single question for her. What do you want to see when you regain your sight? Julia says, well, she's not going to say you. So Julia goes in and asks Augusta, after you regain your sight, what's the first thing you want to see? And she says, a man. So Julia, I guess, figures that's close enough. And so she doesn't tell Augusta about Lionel and Frank's plan, but says, if either of you make her cry, you're going to the moon. That's of course, reference to Frank being pretending to be an astronaut. She makes a fist, a la the honeymooners. The doorbell rings, Augusta answers, and she makes out two male shapes on the doorstep. And she's confused by that, and then only Frank speaks, and clearly is pretending he's alone, so that's throwing Augusta off as well. And Frank comes in, and Lionel stays on the porch, and she's waiting to see what will happen, but he doesn't come in, and she hears Frank's voice from inside after he's already come in. So I think Augusta may figure out what's been going on, and she may now pretend to be blind for a little longer in order to trap Lionel into something.
Yeah, that's what I suspect. I have to say, being someone who has very sensitive eyes myself, I was cringing a little bit when Louise Sorel was looking into that bright lamp, and when she first started to get her eyesight back and she could see the little glow. I thought, my goodness, that must have been painful for the actress if she had to do it for a long period of time.
And that is all that happened on this Friday episode. But as you mentioned, the Kelly and Nick's impending peril was the cliffhanger.
It'll be interesting to see what faux Jack Stanfield Lee does about that, because certainly while Nick would probably be expendable to him in that equation, Kelly is, of course, the daughter of C.C. Capwell. So I think he has to tread a little bit carefully with that.
And we had an episode that had the full credits, and we know they were not just tacked on because they had Mrs. Carmody in the credits, played by Eve Brent Ash, and desk clerk, even though Kelly called him Jerry, Terrence Ford as the desk clerk, and Frank Armstrong. Now, for some reason, I thought his name was Frank Armstead, so maybe I've had that wrong for 35 years. That's Ronnie Shell. So those were the guest casts mentioned. Interesting to note, within the cast, of course, Marissa is not, listed regularly anymore. Jackie Parks is still in the credits at this late date. Just thinking maybe her contract had her, on one of those 3-month repeating every 3 months contracts, and she's still contractually obligated to get a credit, or they are still not sure if she's coming back or not. Maybe the reason we haven't heard of her leaving town is that the writers aren't quite sure if they're going to do anything with that yet.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if she makes any sort of appearance. I mean, we've got Christy now to tempt Ted away from Lakin. So I would say that role that Jackie Parks was sort of playing is gone. Ted has graduated from high school, so any kind of residual
Lemon Prep again.
No, exactly, and any kind of residual scandal about a teacher-student relationship would still probably be frowned upon, but it wouldn't have quite the same impact as if he were still in high school. And they have graduated, so as you say, we're not going to see Lemon Prep again, so I'm not quite sure in what context they would be hanging out with Jackie Parks, unless it was at the Perkins house. But since we're not seeing much of Jade either, I don't know.
Marcello is also still in the credits, so I assume Jackie and Marcello will vanish one day when their contracts officially expire. And Joel Crothers is listed only as J. Stanfield Lee in the credits, so we don't even get a clue from there as to the real name of the character he's been playing for the large percentage of the time.
I guess he is still technically playing the real Jack Stanfield Lee as well, though, since we know he's not dead.
Yeah. And that is it for week 46 of Santa Barbara. We're inching closer to the end of year one, and we'll do. We've got a short week coming up in July with only, I think, 2 or 3 episodes in the week around the 4th of July. So maybe we'll do some year in review stuff in that week a little bit early, but we'll probably do an in memoriam of the characters we've lost in this first year, and then maybe something about the actual actors that have died in the last year from the show, which we had a handful of, and a few other things like characters that just went missing without an explanation. So,
and bombs on yachts.
And other things. So that will be probably, for the most part, at the end of week 52, but maybe some of the ones that can be done in advance we'll use to fill out that July 4th week, a couple of weeks ahead of that. So we will see you again, probably in 2 weeks, when we review week 47 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Well, I've been looking for a woman like me all my life.